Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Today I'm chatting with Sydney-based author Hannah Bent about her moving debut novel When Things Are Alive They Hum, released by one of Australia's newest publishing houses, Ultimo Press. Born and raised in Hong Kong, Hannah studied fine art and film in London before deciding to pursue further studies in writing here in Sydney. Completing a master's in creative writing, Hannah was awarded the Ray Koppe Young Writers Award in 2013 for her novel In Progress. Listeners, this book is something to behold. Exploring themes of grief, love, sisterhood and existence, this story brought me to tears with its exquisite tenderness and insight. So it is with much pleasure that I welcome Hannah to the podcast today. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for giving me that generous introduction.
Hannah, can you tell me what inspired you to begin writing this story?
Absolutely. So I have a sister, Camilla, who has, she lives with Down syndrome, and growing up, we were very close. There's only 3 years difference between us, and Camilla was really the life and soul of a party. She's very charismatic, very vivacious. She loved to perform, was always in plays, was very funny. And when she was about 16, she got encephalitis. And so overnight, we really lost the Camilla that we knew. She lost her ability to speak, her ability to walk, and really became someone I didn't recognize. So I think for me, in writing this book, I was exploring the grief that I had in losing the sister that I knew, and also exploring feelings around not being able to fix her in a way and help her. And so that was, I think, the main impetus for writing this novel for me.
So drawing on your relationship with your own sister Camilla, you began writing about 2 other sisters, Marlo and Harper, in this book. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about them and about their journey in this book.
Yeah, so Marlo and Harper, for me, are kind of 2 sides of the same coin in a way. Harper's very much in her heart, and she sees the world in a very magical way, and she's full of feeling and full of life and loves to express herself. Whereas Marlo's much more scientific, more rational, much more in her head, a little bit more emotionally withdrawn. And I felt the 2 kind of were catalysts for each other's growth throughout the novel.
Like your own sister, Harper lives with Down syndrome, or what she refers to in the book as up syndrome. And in fact, Harper is one of the 2 points of view characters in this book. And I love that we got to see the events of this story unfold from 2 different points of view. Marlo, the older sister, like you said earlier, takes a little bit more of a clinical view on life than Harper does. And this was a fairly central feature of this book. So I wanted to ask you, Hannah, did you explore this consciously and why?
Look, my writing process is quite intuitive, so I didn't really set out to write Marlo in that particular way. I kind of just let them both fall onto the page and kind of went with it, if that makes sense. Having said that, I did feel that Marlo's very kind of withdrawn way of looking at the world and, as you said, a bit more clinical, complemented Harper in a way that allowed me to explore, I think, these 2 opposites, and also how the 2 sisters kind of relate to each other. And it kind of, for me, helped tease out that dynamic a little bit better, having them kind of both on opposite sides of kind of the same coin.
Now, because of Harper's life-threatening heart condition, Marlo has to return home to Hong Kong, and in her efforts to try and save her sister's life, has to confront her own grief over the loss of her mother many years earlier. And I think it's fair to say that Harper's capacity for intuiting her sister's feelings of grief and loss were integral to helping Marlo come to terms with Harper's illness. Is this something that you think you've learned from Camilla and her own brush with illness?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my sister does have a kind of, there's no other way for me to describe it other than an otherworldly quality, in the sense that she is very able to intuit what someone's feeling, perhaps without even them realizing exactly what they're feeling. So sometimes, we'll have family members come over or friends, and they haven't really spoken about something that they're going through, but my sister will pick up on it pretty quickly. And sometimes she'll talk to them in a way, I'll just put a hand on their shoulder or something that kind of renders them in tears or makes them feel less alone in what they're going through. So I think that intuitive aspect of Harper in the novel was very much inspired by my sister. Yeah, I guess that's how it found its way into the work.
Yeah. I felt that for Marlowe, part of her grief was that she had left Hong Kong and her family to pursue her studies in London. I felt that she had guilt or was harboring guilt for having in the first place and pursuing opportunities that her sister would never have. She was healthy and her sister wasn't. And I felt this guilt so powerfully, Hannah. I have people close to me who live with disabilities and chronic illnesses that mean their lives are not as full as they otherwise might be. And there is that constant feeling that by living your own life, you are somehow being selfish. Is this something that you felt or feel too?
Yeah, it's definitely an aspect of it. I mean, I felt it very acutely when we were teenagers. And there was one point where my sister had kind of real love affair with another young man. And we were basically told in the center that she was at that she wasn't allowed to have this love affair. And, I felt the guilt very acutely then because I had no restrictions on what I wanted to do. No one told me what I could and couldn't do in life. And my sister couldn't even kind of follow her heart in this way. So yeah, for sure, that guilt is a huge part of our relationship. I'm not surprised that it's found its way into the novel as well.
So tell me about the title and why was it important to explore the theme of the hum in this novel?
Yeah, so the title actually was something that really came very last minute. I really struggled on finding a title, and this was literally a line out of the book, something that Harper says. And it seemed to fit because at the end of my writing process with this novel and perhaps my grieving process, not that I reached an end with it, but I felt that there was something beyond grief, beyond love that was much deeper than perhaps I could find sufficient words for. And I really tried not to pin it down too much in the novel. So the hum kind of, for me, feels like something like the interconnectedness between all of us, something a bit more mysterious that's perhaps harder to describe, perhaps something very deep and is quite hard to find words for sometimes. So I think that's where the hum came from for me. And I think as I was writing, it kind of revealed itself over and over again in many different ways. So it wasn't something that was very easy to write about or something that I wanted to necessarily find a lot of clarity around either.
You've given Marlowe such an interesting background. She studies butterflies and moths. Someone who is called now, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but a lepidopterist. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that butterflies are incredibly symbolic of Marlowe's journey in this book. In many ways, the Marlowe we meet at the beginning of the novel is cocooned by her grief, unable to live her life to the fullest, but is transformed by the end of the novel. So I wanted to ask you, Hannah, how did you arrive at this? Why was this symbol important?
Again, it wasn't something that I had planned on. The butterflies kind of found their way onto the page, as did any other character. It wasn't till I kind of noticed a common thread while writing that the butterflies kept appearing, that I took it seriously, and I went to go and study with a entomologist at Sydney University. I didn't study with him, I kind of shadowed him. And I then later learned throughout the writing process that, butterflies can be a symbol for the afterlife. They can be a symbol for love, immortality. And I thought that was a lovely touch. But again, it wasn't something that I consciously set out to include in the novel.
You've described this novel as a love letter to Camilla, but I also felt that it was an ode to your childhood and the place of your birth, a nod to your ties there. Hannah, how important do you think setting the novel in Hong Kong was for the story's success?
Oh, that's a really lovely question. I just have a great love for Hong Kong. And as you said, it was a huge part of my childhood. And there's a energy to Hong Kong, a vibrancy and a beauty that I could not write about. I wrote most of this book while I was overseas living in Australia. And so I had a great homesickness. And I guess through writing about it, I was able to kind of go back there in my mind. And I think that's kind of where it really came from.
And do you still have family there?
I do. My brother still lives there.
I felt it was like an incredible melding, quite a unique melding of Eastern and Western cultures. You have a lot of Chinese dialect. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that correctly in there. And you're careful to tell us both Marlowe's Chinese name and Harper's Chinese name. Was this something that you grew up with as well?
Absolutely. I mean, for most of my life, I've lived in Hong Kong, actually, and what I was writing was very subconscious, and I think I was just including experiences that I had lived as a child. Although I'm not Chinese and I'm not Eurasian, it was very much a huge part of my childhood. As I said, I think it came out because there was a huge longing for it while I was away from it.
I know aspects of this story are hard to talk about without giving away spoilers, but one of the more emotionally gripping themes in this book is how far you would go to save a loved one's life. Something I thought you explored so deftly from both Marlowe and Harper's points of view. For Marlowe, doing something meant that she was living up to her promise to her mother all those years ago. But in the process, she lost her perspective, didn't she?
She did. This was something that I kind of thought a lot about while my sister was going through what she was going through after her illness. You know, there was a point where I kind of felt very desperate in not being able to save my sister, and kind of, although I wasn't about to go take her to get a transplant, it did make me think a lot about what I would do to save her, and how desperately I wanted to hold on to the Camilla that I knew growing up. And I guess that's where that madcap element of the journey came from for me while writing. I do feel grief can take you to some very deep and perhaps dark places, and that was one of them for me.
Hannah, you've spent many years pursuing studies in creative pursuits. How important has this been to your journey towards publication?
Oh, I think it's been everything. When I write, I write in a very visual way. So I kind of see an image in my mind, and then I try to find the words for it. So it's been a huge part of the way I work. I'm very inspired by filmmakers and photographers, painters. And I actually think it's really important to, when writing, to look very broadly, to read very broadly, to draw from different parts of creative expression and life. It's only enriched me, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to have those experiences in my life to draw from.
Are you able to tell us a little bit more about your path to publication?
It's been a long road. I think this book took me over 10 years to write. I think that was also a lot to do with the fact that I was going on my own journey with grief, and I needed time to kind of figure things out myself. But in that 10 years, I did the Alan Unwin Faber Academy course, and I did a reading there. And I was very lucky. Gabby Naya was there, and she got in touch. I didn't feel I was ready at the time to submit the manuscript in its entirety. So I waited something like 8 years and then submitted it to her about a year and a half ago. And she loved it. And it kind of, just went on a life of its own from there, which I could only be so grateful for. It's been amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. I've spoken to many authors on this podcast in terms of chronicling how important the creative process of writing helps people deal with grief. And you said something before that made me think that perhaps, this was an important part of your own journey in dealing with grief. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would say that. It wasn't something that I, again, consciously set out to do to kind of unravel my grief. But I guess being someone who's always needed to be self-expressive somehow and creative, it was very hard to separate kind of this big thing that I was going through from my creative process. And so in a way, it did help me transform what I was going through and kind of make sense of it all as well. And I guess my hope in some way was also that, some of the lovely things that Camilla had taught me in life and given me in life can now be passed on.
Has Camilla read the book, or does she have an opinion about the book?
She struggles to read now. So I've been reading her passages, and, occasionally she'll laugh or say she likes certain things about it. But again, her ability to speak is very diminished now. So even if she wanted to say something, it would be very difficult for her.
Yeah. Okay. Hannah, there are a lot of aspiring writers who listen to this podcast, and given your experiences and your journey to date, I wondered if you had any tips that you might be able to pass on.
Oh, yeah, gosh. From my journey, I think having support, I had such a long journey to publication, and at some points during the 10 years, I think I lost steam, and I kind of struggled a lot with self-doubt. And it was really important then to kind of have a good support network. I have a very loving family. I have loving friends. I had a great writers group. writing can be so solitary, and having those connections really helped balance it out, I feel, for me, and motivate me and keep me going. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, another thing I'd say is just read again, read books that you love over and over again. I mean, it really fueled me and reminded me of why I love writing. And wherever you can, also draw from other aspects of creative expression. I think you could never underestimate what going to an art gallery and looking at an amazing painting can do for you, or watching an inspiring movie, or things like that. Those for me were great sources of strength.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Hannah, if listeners wanted to connect with you, how can they do that?
I'm on Instagram, Hannah Bent Author. I have a website, hannahbent.com.
Hannah, if there was one thing you wanted readers to take away from this book, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would just be really touched if somehow the hum can speak to their own personal experiences. I don't want to force feed anyone anything through this book. If just in a small, subtle way, they notice something about their lives that they hadn't before, or people around them, or the world. I mean, just small things, just the small things in life. If it could touch a reader in a small way like that, I'd be really happy.
Well, it certainly touched me, Hannah. It moved me to tears. So I wanted to say congratulations on the publication of this exquisite book. I wish you every success with it, and thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tenellis, or on my webpage, claudinetennellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.